Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss electoral reform, as the Sunday Express seem to be reporting that Labour have ruled it out. Where have we heard that before? In reality, as always, and I mean as always when this is announced, when you read what Labour have actually said, they've not ruled it out at all, but they're not ruling it in either. And unlike with some things, the manifesto actually leaves ample room to press ahead with electoral reform. What's currently holding it back is the motivation for Labour to feel that it is an urgent priority, right? Problem is, none of the groups campaigning for it are bothering to, well, campaign for it. Why not? But first, for daily political commentary, please click the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So, the Sunday Express headline, Keir Starmer rules out changing voting system months after landslide victory. As always with these headlines, the quote tells a different story. What is the quote? According to the Express, a junior minister said there were no plans to reform the electoral system. Now, I've tried to find the very specific quote on that. I couldn't find it on Hansard or anything, so I'm not sure where they've said it. But I have said before, no plans is political speak for, yeah, we don't want to say we're going to do it. That's it. If a politician is ruling something out, if you ask them to rule it out, they'll say, yeah, we're ruling it out. It's really that simple. And even then, ruling something out only lasts for the length of a parliament. So, for example, Labour had no plans to raise capital gains tax or employers' national insurance during the general election campaign, but they're doing both of them next week. They didn't rule it out, you see. They were asked repeatedly during the election campaign, would you rule it out? And they wouldn't rule it out. They refused to rule it out. Now they're doing it, right? That's how it works. Same with public sector pay. They would talk about, well, are you going to pay public sector pay workers more? Are you going to sort of start giving them pay parity again? It was like, well, we haven't got endless funds, you know, we can't write blank checks. So people took that to mean, oh, they're going to be really stingy. And then immediately they won the election. What did they do? Approved above inflation pay deals. Just like they did in 1997. You know, Labour have ruled out EU entry or entry to the single market or customs union, freedom of movement. So there is zero prospect of any of those this parliament. That is how politics works. If a government is ruling something out, all you need to ask them is, are you ruling it out? And they will say, yes, we're ruling it out. If they won't say that, even when asked directly, then they're not ruling it out. I have recently used the youth mobility scheme as a classic example. Lots of people insist and Labour have ruled it out, despite the fact that when journalists and MPs in the House of Commons have repeatedly asked ministers, are you ruling it out then? They have stood up and gone, they've refused to rule it out. They will simply just say, we're not bringing back freedom of movement. Even when Stella Creasy, Labour MP, said, youth mobility schemes are not freedom of movement. Are you ruling it out? Stood up, we're not bringing back freedom of movement. You know, the term no plans features heavily in a lot of their responses for that as well, even though they have been reported as saying off the record that they expect to agree to it. I guess one useful aspect of this EU youth mobility proposal is that when we do agree to it, maybe I can finally use it as a concrete case to show people, look, this is how political speak works. But anyway, this refusal to rule out electoral reform means it hasn't been ruled out, but nor does that necessarily mean that they are privately expecting to deliver it at some point in the future. And even if they are, it could be that they plan on doing so after implementing their major reforms, which sounds fine. You know, get all the stuff out of the way first that fixes broken Britain. Sure, okay. But what if they miscalculate? You know, what if they accidentally lose a general election just as they're getting ready to clear the decks for electoral reform in, say, 10 years or so? Some of you may have noticed that I haven't spoken much about electoral reform since the election. Now, that was not expected on my part. I was hoping I was going to be discussing it on a relatively regular basis. Because with Labour in power, I've said that my top 3 policy priorities are electoral reform, media reform, and rejoining the EU. And in that order, none of which are officially Labour policy, which is sort of why they're my priorities. Because there's no point in prioritising something the government are either definitely going to do or definitely not going to do. It's pointless. But only rejoining the EU is ruled out for this parliament, even though what Labour are trying to do is exactly what we would be doing if we wanted to join later on anyway. So I'm reasonably comfortable with that, as long as they succeed, of course. But leading up to the election, I kept bemoaning the fact that there seemed to be no coordinated action to draw up support for proportional representation, or just, you know, talking about electoral reform in general. And I was told, well, you know, this is because of election law, different groups, they have to be careful how they link up. Otherwise, they could be classed as the same group and therefore have to share a pot of money that they're allowed to spend on campaigning activities. So basically, election rules, you know, stop them coordinating too closely. But I was told once the election's over, those rules don't apply because the Electoral Commission do not expect people to anticipate a snap election so soon after the general election. So there's no problem at all. Link yourselves up, go nuts. So I was expecting, after the election, a big coordinated push from various campaign groups to go big. I was expecting they were just keeping their powder dry, wait for the election, election's done, Labour in power, boom, all of a sudden we're going to make a big thing of proportional representation. So I waited, and I waited. I noticed LCR, the Labour Campaign for Electoral Reform, the group within Labour, they were making a push. And as always, if you're a Labour member in favour of electoral reform, I would strongly urge you to join them. The more members they have, the more clout they have. It's really that simple. That's how groups within Labour work. But that's internal pressure. That's not enough. We need the issue to become a public talking point. And it's the non-partisan groups who need to push that in the public, in the media. And the media are not going to do it without that push. So, you know, I was thinking, well, I'll just wait for this push to happen, then I can start talking about it. Then crickets. Like, what are they doing? This was the absolute best time to push the issue. It's in Labour's interest, but we know they've got a jam-packed parliamentary schedule. They're not going to make time for electoral reform right now because that would mean pushing something else out. And all of the stuff they're trying to get done at the moment is the stuff that they think they need to get in now to start showing those improvements so they win the next election. You know, they're basically in a rush to deal with the 14 years of Tory vandalism. But I'm not comfortable thinking that as soon as there's less pressure on the need for legislation, when Labour have sort of got their ducks in a row, that they will suddenly start talking about it. I know there are still some influential elements within the party, which doesn't include Keir Starmer, by the way, but there are elements who are happy for Labour to win power for a bit, then go into opposition, rather than be a partner in a more stable and long-lasting government. They'd rather call the shots some of the time than have to compromise all of the time. So we need the issue to go public. It needs to be made a serious talking point. It would have support amongst, at the very least, the Lib Dems, Greens and Reform UK, as well as a hell of a lot of Labour. But just Lib Dems, Greens and Reform UK, they accounted for basically exactly a third of all the votes cast in the election this year. Also, over the past few months, there's been plenty of room to get political issues reported on. Like, if you had a political campaign to push, the last few months was the time to do it. I said it before, there's been a very extended silly season this year. It was the best time to kickstart a political campaign. Political journalists were desperate for things to report on, even stuff they wouldn't like to report on, and yet nothing. Really like to know why that is. I'm someone who's very interested in electoral reform. Every internet algorithm that has anything to do with me will know that. Yet, I've not seen anything about pro-electoral reform at all for months. And then what does happen, the first time I see something, it's the pissing Sunday Express. And I tell you what, if I didn't notice anything, like when I spend my day scanning the news, and I'm a big advocate for electoral reform, I think it's a fair bet there's nothing to notice. Why not? The reason electoral reform is a top issue for me, the top issue, is because it makes every other progressive cause easy to achieve. You name one, and it's like, well, if you push for electoral reform first, you'd get that quicker as well. It weakens the influence of the media on elections because more people, and more importantly, more types of people, have a vote that counts. The media, in a first-past-the-post system, are very good at targeting specific groups, just like politicians. They target specific groups of people who are influential, who swing elections. If you massively increase the number of types of people who will swing elections, that's not as easy to do. So they'll be less successful at it, at gaming the system. You know how people will bandy about a poll that says, oh, look, the majority agree with this particular cause. Yeah, it's worthless. Worthless under our current system. Majority opinion counts for bog all in a first past the post system. But if we push for a form of elections which creates a representative parliament, all of a sudden I won't think you look silly by waving these polls around as if they should mean something to politicians. Because they will. Or at least they're more likely to. No system's perfect. But the system we have is one of the least perfect imaginable. But unless non-partisan groups start to actually make an issue of this, then we're left hoping that Labour's no plans response is actually a cunning plan to absolutely push ahead with it once they've implemented their more urgent policies, once they've got all the legislation in place for building, for energy, for everything they need to do, and that they then judge, right, the time is right, we're now into this thing, we've got the parliamentary time now, let's do it. I'm not sure about you. I'm not keen to put my faith in politicians of any party having a long-term cunning plan. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you can join for memberships. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.